here. And then, so here are the people who basically created Hitler and the Nazis, along with their corporate buddies in IBM, Thomas Watson, and in the Union Banking Corporation, Prescott Bush, American Hamburg Steamship Line. And in 1931, when Germany was trying to put together a democratic and free republic, the Weimar Republic, it was these people who then pulled the plug out from under, the rug out from under the German economy by withholding loans, by calling in loans, and they did the same thing to Germany they are now doing to us.
Jim, stay with us because I want to talk with you about the Stephenville, Texas UFO case and also the case that the UFO hunters just did on the History Channel just a few days ago. We'll be back in a moment with Jim Mars on Coast to Coast AM. Well, happy holidays, because we're still giving you that double CD, Art Bell's Interviews Classics with the late Father Malachi Martin, when you renew or subscribe the After Dark magazine. Call 1-888-727-5505. That's 1-888-727-5505, or go online at coast2coastam.com. Jim Mars, let's talk about some UFOs. We'll talk about John Teeter as well and so many other subjects you've got here later on tonight. We'll take some phone calls with Jim Mars. We started him early. Jim, UFO sightings around Stephenville, Texas, one of our programs with the Sci-Fi Network. Incredible story. You've looked at that, huh?
Yes, that's right. In fact, let me tell you, they're still going on right now.
Yeah.
They're still having sightings down there, and of course it's not getting the nationwide attention that it did back at the first of the year. But it's still going on, and I'll tell you, one of the things that just blows my mind, and I think it'll blow yours too, is that working with the state director of MUFON and other investigators, they managed to get hold of the radar data for that area back at the first of the year when they were sighting all these things, lights in the sky, things moving around.
Yeah.
And they found one very, very large object that was moving towards the south at 37 miles an hour. Now, George, you don't have to be an aviation expert to know that no solid object can stay in the air at 37 miles an hour.
No, it'll drop right to the ground.
Below airspeed.
Yeah.
So
I can walk that fast, almost.
Right. Right. Now, yeah, and you mentioned before the break about the Aurora story. I've been bursting to tell people the news about Aurora because I worked with the History Channel folks back in the summer on this story, but it was their show, and they had the scientific investigation going on, and they, asked that I know there's not talk about it until their show airs.
Right,
well,
right.
Now it's aired. And for those of listeners, I'll just recap it briefly because
Sure.
I think this is the smoking gun of the UFO issue. All these years, people say, well, it's a secret government test craft, or it's misidentified aircraft. Oh, they just saw a satellite going by. Okay? So I always thought, wouldn't it be great if there was really a very well-documented UFO incident prior to anything man-made being in the air? And this is it. Aurora, Texas, 1897, 6 years before the Wright brothers flew, and 6 years before there was powered balloon flight in the United States. There was nothing man-made in the air, and yet the Dallas Morning News and the Old Fort Worth Record, which was the forerunner of my old newspaper, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, all carried stories that on April the 17th, a large silver cigar-shaped object crashed in Aurora, Texas. And in the story, it states that the pilot of the ship is supposed to have been the only one on board, and while his remains are badly disfigured, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world.
Oh, my God. And that was in the paper.
That was
in the paper.
That was in the Dallas Morning News, which is still in publication. Now, they said that this non-human pilot was buried in the Aurora Cemetery. And that's the story. And that was the story that I picked up way back in the early 70s when I first got onto this story. And at that time, there were still 3 people alive who had been alive in the Aurora area in 1897. One lady said it was all a hoax, but then by her own account, she had no direct knowledge of it. Somebody came by and told her father about it, and he laughed and said, "Oh, that old Judge Proctor, he's such a joker." So based on that, she said it was a hoax. Another lady had no direct knowledge, but she said she remembers her parents running into town and coming back and telling her about all this wreckage. So she indicated that something had actually happened. And then I talked to Charlie Stevens, and he said as a young boy, he was out early that morning doing the chores with his dad, and he actually saw the thing go over, heard the explosion, and saw the smoke coming up from Aurora. So based on that, plus a lot of other information, I began to think there really was something to this. But the debunkers said, no, it was just a hoax story placed in the newspaper trying to draw attention to the town because the railroad had bypassed it and it was dying on the vine. It was all a hoax. There was no grave in the cemetery. There was no debris found there anywhere. And, of course, by all accounts, everybody came from miles around and picked up the metal and hauled it away. One person I interviewed said his grandfather told him that law enforcement people showed up and were loading pieces of this metal onto wagons and hauling it off. One of the first crash retrievals, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's kind of where the story's been. You know, some people think it happened, some people think it didn't happen, and what they've done now with the scientific investigation is show that yes, they found the supports for the windmill. There was a windmill, or at least a windlass, a derrick tower that was used to haul the sump up for the sump pump in this well, which is at the location, and they finally uncovered the concrete, and sure enough, there was a well there.
What about the grave and the headstones and things like that,
They
Jim?
did ground-penetrating radar, and they found that, indeed, there was a grave at that site. And, of course, the headstone's been missing since 1973. I'm one of the few people left who actually saw the little headstone while it was in position. And, George, I'll tell you, it was rounded on one end and then kind of sharply cut off on the other as though it had been broken in half. But on the half that was still there was an inverted V shape with little circles in the center. And I've always thought that if you extrapolate that design over to the other side, you're going to have a cigar-shaped object, a saucer object with little portholes right along the side. Now, here's the clincher, though. They found around the area of the well where the crash reportedly took place molted aluminum, but this aluminum did not match the metal composition of modern aluminum. And it was like little globs of it, as though it had been melted, and it was embedded in 100-year-old trees and in rocks and in the soil, and the scientists said that is evidence of a tremendous explosion. So there was a grave, there was a windmill, or at least a derrick there, and there was this metal that gives evidence of an explosion. The Aurora spaceship story, which I covered extensively in my book, Alien Agenda, has been proven to be essentially true.
Who do you think ran off with the remains of this creature?
Well, since I have talked to at least 4 or 5 separate people who live in and around the Aurora area, because I don't live very far from that myself. And in fact, some of the people that I went to church with up there in Boyd live in that Aurora area. And they said, and different people over different times, said in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and even in the 90s, they had encountered federal government agents in that cemetery. So
just what I suspect.
Exactly what you thought. They've gone in there. It's like Roswell all over again. They have picked up every little piece of evidence that they could find, and they thought they had it pretty well covered, but they missed the little globs because it had been cemented over when the well had been covered over.
Gosh, it is a remarkable case, Jim.
It really is.
And, you know, the fact that there were consistencies of events, you know, you've got to piece it together. You know, and I was told a long time ago, so George, it doesn't matter if you can't find, 1,000 pink rabbits in the field to admit that there's one. All you got to do is find one.
All you got to do is find one.
Yep.
And when you find a half dozen, then you know somewhere there's a bunch of pink rabbits.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Phoenix case, 1997. You looked into this.
Oh, yes. That was a very interesting case, too.